The views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect those of this station.
Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those in the community as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
I want you to tell me how and why is this okay? With Michigan lawmakers failing to update its registry, have they lost trust and credibility with the community?
Well, I certainly, first let me just say that I'm answering this question from the perspective of a defense lawyer. I've been doing this for 41 years from the defense side. So from that perspective, yeah, I think there could and should have been changes. I think that the primary changes that I would have requested is that the Sexual Offender Registry Act tries to put people in categories, broad categories, without being individual or personal as to each particular case, offense, defendant, victim, etc. So as you know that, for example, the registry requires that you be tiered, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, with a significant difference as to how long you're going to be on the registry, from 15 years up to life, depending upon what tier you're in. And every case is different. And while a judge has the discretion about how long you're going to be put in jail or prison, why can't the judge who's right there, feet first in the case, seeing everything firsthand, be able to at least give a range within which an individual would go on the registry? He'd be given a range, and then he would have, she, by the way, excuse me for that, he or she, the judge, would be able to pick the appropriate amount of time within that range that fits the particulars of the case. I think also there ought to be a means by which your behavior once you go on the registry is taken into further account. If you misbehave, you stay on. If you don't, if you're a stellar citizen, then why not have an easier opportunity to petition the court for relief from the Sexual Offender Registry Act? That's what I would have done.
Okay, so you say you're the defense.
Correct.
And you've been licensed for over 40 years. Tell me,
that's true.
Tell me why you chose that side.
The defense side?
Yes.
Well, that's a very good question. I've never asked myself that, and I talk to myself a lot. But I think I've just had a thing for the underdog. And I just get a real charge out of taking on very difficult cases, and I guess our firm kind of proves that. We take on the tough ones. It's a high wire act, very stressful, but it's also very rewarding, and it's good to do it appropriately, in concert with a judge, in concert with a prosecutor, in a way that gets the job done. So no side is cheating. And I think the relationship we have with the court, with the prosecutor's office, despite all of the cases we take, we get along. And that's very rewarding. That's why I'm doing it.
I want to go back for a second because you mentioned that with good behavior and with things taken into account, you know, we should, I guess, give people second chances. But when we're dealing with cases and very just difficult cases like these, should someone be given a second chance for knowingly doing something as heinous as something like this?
When you define the action that the defendant took as heinous, then that would fall into the category where I believe no judge would utilize his or her discretion to give that individual a chance to get out from under SORA. I'm talking about situations which may not reach the level you just described, and they're all different. There are, I mean, I'm telling you, from a defense side, you have to have a sexual offender registry. It's an idea that's gone to all 50 states for very good reason, but it can be more discretionary, more personalized, but a heinous act, you're on it.
Tell us about some of the cases that you've defended.
I've defended every type of case from a 16-year, 1-month-old boy who had consensual sex with his 15-year-old, about 10-month girlfriend. They were about 3 months apart in age. Then he had to go on the registry years and years ago. I've defended in a sexual assault case a Catholic priest. We've recently had a case that blew up the news of a young man who unfortunately is going off for a very long period of time. We're currently representing a female in a highly publicized case. So we get all kinds, and that's kind of a microcosm of our world. There's no particular profile that establishes a suspect, an alleged criminal.
Right. I want to read a statement to you that was in the Alpena News that the Alpena County Sheriff said about this particular situation. He mentioned that we're all young and we do stupid things. I'm not accusing what the individual may or may not have done, but does this mean we have to punish the individual for the rest of their life for something stupid they did when they were young? That's what's being addressed.
Okay. The sheriff is talking about what's loosely called the Romeo and Juliet exception to sexual offender registry. That came in, I believe, in 2011, the last time it was updated, the act. And it's a very good idea. The sheriff is dead on. Take us back to the first example I gave you where I represented a kid who's just over 16 having consensual sex with a girl just under 16, just below the age of consent. He goes off on the sexual offender registry. Under the Romeo and Juliet statute, he doesn't, because they're within 4 years of one another. She's at least reached a certain age, and it was consensual. Those are practical, that's a very practical and very reasonable response to a problem. Too many young kids make one mistake and they go on the registry, and all of the impact of the registry. You have to register just about everything you've got, your car, your whereabouts, anything, your job, any changes of residence. You can't be loitering in a park, anywhere where children could be, school, church. If you're a young person, have young if you're married, well, single, you're a young parent, looking forward to raising your kids through school, going to extracurricular activities, you can't do it. The sexual offender registry is a significant thing. Oftentimes, it is more significant than is the imprisonment part of being convicted.
I just want to ask one more question before we go. So you said that the sexual offender registry is significant, but if it's not updated, how will the people in Malapena feel safe? I mean, there should be dozens or at least hundreds added, but if they're not added and we can't see who it is, how are we supposed to feel safe?
Well, I'm not sure I quite understand that, because the Act still requires people who fall into the appropriate tiers to register, and then they are registering either quarterly or semi-annually, and so it is updated even under the current law. That has not changed. So I'm not sure if I'm missing something, but yeah, sexual offenders who have to go on the registry they're under that microscope, as they always have been. And the public should, in my opinion, feel safe that they will know who in the community has been convicted of an offense that requires them to register.
Thank you so much, Mr. White, for having this interview with us.
You're welcome.
So a mayor's job is to lead council meetings and work with the legislative body to enact laws. Tell us a little bit about why Michigan lawmakers missed their deadline to update the Sex Registry Act.
Well, I'm not entirely sure on that. I read about it. I reached out to a couple of our legislators. I'm assuming that they're not on the specific committee, so we're just waiting to get their information back to me. So I'm not really sure where they're at with that. Sorry.
Well, speak about how important it is for Alpena to know about who's on our list or who's our neighbor.
That I can answer for, because from my perspective of the sex offender registry list is that if you base the numbers on reoccurrences once someone is released from prison or jail, the incarceration rehabilitation program isn't working as best as we would want it to. So the registry list is what we have to know who's in our neighborhood, specifically if we're opening a child care center or have perhaps maybe a single person that's living in a neighborhood, and all of a sudden someone else in the neighborhood is very kind to your children all of a sudden, or something like that. You kind of want to know whether that person has a record, and I think we have the right to know whether that person has a record of inappropriate sexual behavior.
Now, you mentioned numbers. Let's talk about numbers. According to citydata.com, Alpena has a ratio from all residents to sex offender is 120 to 1. Now, because the registry is not updated, does this mean that Michigan lawmakers kind of fail the community in letting them know who is around us?
I don't know specifically if we can put it on a failure of our legislators or just exactly where the breakdown comes from. Is it unnerving? Yes. Is it a failure at a certain Yeah. But I, in my position, I would hesitate to point fingers, only because I don't know the specifics of why that data isn't being updated.
But you're not agreeing that the people should be updated?
I agree that the people should know. The people should be updated. Now, the court system has said that they want specific changes based on some lawsuits, and I understand those. I understand and pretty much agree with the sheriff's comments that he made in the paper. If our list includes individuals that aren't aren't a threat to society or a threat to our neighborhoods or a threat to our school children or wherever, then perhaps it should be changed, and I don't have an issue with that. But hopefully that the registry intact of people, individuals that are a threat to our community, stays intact and is updated.
So the article that we're speaking about is the one that came out in the Alpena News about the Michigan lawmakers missing the deadline. So going forward, when they do reach this deadline, what are some of the new things that are supposed to be in place?
Well, from my understanding, the language of the registry needs to be updated to not include those who the court system is saying that we shouldn't include. And so what missing that deadline means to the future of the legislation or the policy or the laws, I really can't answer to them, and I'm not really even sure what or if there is penalties for us missing this new 60-day deadline. So
yeah, because I wasn't too sure what the penalties were. It wasn't clear, or their penalties weren't mentioned. But do you know what type of penalties would happen if lawmakers, like an exception of this case or this scenario, what happens when we just leave it alone?
No, I couldn't speak to that. I really have no idea what the court system would do in the event that we missed, not we, but the state government missed the next deadline. I'm really not sure what that would be.
Okay.
But to the most of my knowledge, the best of my knowledge, the sex offender registry is being updated. People are being added to it. The case is that the policy that runs that program needs to be updated. So so I'm not aware of us having individuals in our community that aren't being put on the registry, but someone else could probably speak more intelligently to that than me.
Okay. So what would you tell a community member that just worried, who had a family and, was curious about this type of situation? What could you say to them to make them feel more safe?
Sure. I generally point people in the right direction. That's kind of part of what I do as well. So my first recommendation would be to go on the Michigan State Police website, State of Michigan website, Michigan State Police. From my understanding, they're the ones that update the registry. So do a quick search if it's not on the front page for Michigan Sex Offender Registry, and go to our community, and the map will pop up, and a registry list and things. And so if you're concerned about that, if you perhaps have young children, or you're running a home daycare system or anything, you're just living here and you have a concern about that, and the neighborhood you might be moving into, or new people have been moving into your neighborhood, then you can look at that registry and you can see who's in your neighborhood. And it doesn't, from my perspective, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person's bad, and I don't want to give the impression that I think that that person is automatically going to reoffend. But it could help you identify some red flags if that individual has behavior that you might question that. Then I think it's a good awareness. It's red flags, so it's a good tool to use.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mayor, for having this interview
You're welcome.
with us.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
I still feel safe personally, but I feel that the Michigan legislature has failed its constituents by not keeping this list updated so people with children or single women or family members can feel safe in the community and know where they're at and know if they're in a safe area.
I've always been in a small town. I grew up in a small town in northern Michigan. Alpena is a bit bigger than where I grew up, but I do feel like it's still a smaller, tight-knit community. I do feel like my neighbors have my back and we kind of keep each other informed with who's in and out of the neighborhood and everything like that, but you don't always know that, you know, and I think knowing that the state of Michigan hasn't updated, I mean, it's important. It's one thing to have all these deadlines and procedures and policies and laws in place, but if you don't practice them and you don't enforce them, then what's the point? I trust in that, you know, people can change and learn from their mistakes and hope that most people would, but we don't always know that. So my first priority is to protect them and make sure that they're knowledgeable and informed about what people are capable of, and to make sure that they can move forward then with making their decisions based on that.
Some of them do. I don't feel that violent sex offenders should get a second chance in the community, but if it's a minor offense or something and they can be rehabilitated, yes, they should be given the second chance in the community. It's important for you to know about sex offenders being able to keep your family safe, keep your family members, your children safe, so you know if they're in their neighborhood. But it's also good to know what kind of sex offender they are, I guess. If it was a violent sex offender or something as bad as, you know, they got kept peeing on a dumpster because there's no bathroom around.
I would like to see it enforced. I mean, there have been obviously within the last couple of years, some headlined cases and lawsuits in the public eye that I do not feel like have been handled correctly. I think when young men might make some of these mistakes, the hammer needs to come down. Like, how would other people feel if that was their daughter in that situation, or their son? They're not the only ones, you know. To see any kid have to go through that, or young woman, it's just ridiculous and it needs to stop.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. If you have any comments, suggestions, or topics you would like to see on a future show, please email WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.